Well, ladies and gentlemen, President Trump didn't just win a fight over mail-in ballots. Recently, he's won something more important. The Supreme Court. They just told a coalition of states that they cannot freeze the president's election integrity operation based on what they think might happen later. They have to show an actual injury. That's a good headline for us. Okay? The Supreme Court lifted this lower court injunction that had blocked key parts of President Trump's election integrity executive order. The court's 6-member majority concluded that the state's lawsuit was premature. So in plain English, the states were trying to stop the machinery before the machinery had actually done anything to harm them. And the Supreme Court said no. Well, folks, I'm J.R. Majewski, for those of you that don't know. And most of the coverage is going to frame this as another 6-3 Trump victory at the Supreme Court. And that's true, but it misses why this matters, because this case was really about whether political opponents can use the federal courts to stop a president's administration before its agencies have even finished implementing a policy. And on this one, the courts rightfully drew the line. Now, to understand the significance, you have to look at what President Trump's order actually does. There are 3 major pieces. First, the order directs the Department of Homeland Security, working with the Social Security Administration and existing federal citizenship records, to develop what the order calls state citizenship lists. Okay, those lists would identify adult citizens residing in each state. Now, they don't replace the voter rolls. They don't automatically determine who is registered to vote, and the states are not required to use them. The idea is simple. The federal government possesses citizenship and naturalization data that state elected officials generally don't have in one consolidated system. And Trump wants that information organized and made available to the states. Second, the order directs the Attorney General to prioritize investigations and, where appropriate, prosecutions involving people who knowingly issue or distribute federal ballots to individuals who are not legally eligible to vote. It doesn't create a new crime. It just tells the Justice Department what kind of existing violations should receive attention. And third, the order directs the Postal Service to develop a uniform standard for federal ballot mail. And that's where the barcodes and the audit trail comes in. Now, this is the part that is getting distorted. The Postal Service is not deciding who gets the vote, doesn't maintain voter rolls, it doesn't open any ballots, doesn't know who anybody votes for. The states still determine voter eligibility, who receives a ballot, and whether a return ballot is counted. The Postal Service, and the rule, is just to establish preparation and data standards for ballot mail before it enters the mail. Okay, under the rule, outbound and return ballot envelopes just carry a unique, intelligent mail barcode. Now, before the outbound ballots are presented to the Postal Service, an authorized election official or vendor would upload basic information into a federal ballot mail portal, as the recipient's name, their address, their state, and the barcode assigned to the outbound envelope, and the barcode assigned to the return envelope. No social security numbers, no date of birth, no party registration, nothing. Okay? Just the information that's necessary to track the ballot mailing. And this is where a background like mine matters. I've spent more than 2 decades in the nuclear power industry. I've ran for Congress. Okay? But if you look at the nuclear power industry, it's a high consequence operation. And in that operation, you don't call a process secure because everybody involved says the procedures were followed. You have to have traceability to these processes. You identify them, you document the handoffs, you know where things originated, you know where it's supposed to go, you maintain traceability. Okay? It's not an accusation that everybody involved is corrupt. It's just how a serious system is designed. And that's where I think people are missing the mark here. Election integrity shouldn't begin after somebody discovers there's a problem. Shouldn't start when everybody starts fighting over what happened. The purpose of these controls is to make irregularities detectable before you get to that point. Okay? This barcode doesn't tell you anything about how somebody voted. It just tells you that a specific ballot and this envelope was generated for a specific recipient and entered into the mail stream through an identifiable process, basic process control. Now, going back to the Supreme Court, when the states filed this lawsuit, they weren't pointing to a specific citizenship list that had wrongly removed someone from a voter roll. They were not pointing to an actual prosecution. And they certainly weren't challenging the final version of the Postal Service rule. They were challenging President Trump and his instructions telling federal agencies to begin building these systems. And the Supreme Court said no. Okay. And the majority rule put it plainly. Federal courts review final rules and propose rules, and certainly not internal directives to propose a rule. That's the key distinction. Okay. If an agency later implements something unlawful, then it can be challenged. If a voter suffers an actual legal injury, then challenge it. If a final rule exceeds statutory authority, challenge it. But you don't get to assume the worst possible future version of a policy and use that assumption to stop any executive branch before it acts. And that's why this ruling is something that's going to reverberate beyond election law. Okay, once courts start supervising what agencies may do instead of reviewing what they actually did, well, the judiciary is no longer just resolving cases, it's managing the executive branch in advance. And Supreme Court is not willing to let that happen. So there's still an important limitation. Okay, a separate injunction in another lawsuit involving illegal women voters remains in effect. They sue every damn election. Okay. But what it means is the Postal Service is still blocked from actually implementing the new ballot mail requirement right now. So the entire system, doesn't suddenly go live tomorrow. The fight is still active, but the legal battlefield is changed. Okay, before this ruling, opponents were trying to stop President Trump's executive orders themselves. Now they're going to have to attack the individual policies as those policies become real. And that's important because the administration has the room now to develop the programs, build the administrative record, respond to objections, and defend each component based on what it actually does, not what it's assumed it would do. And that's the broader strategy that I think people should be paying attention to. Okay, Trump's not relying on one single election integrity vehicle. He has multiple tracks moving at the same time. This is his MO. Okay, the legislative fight over the Save America Act, the Justice Department enforcement, federal citizenship data, Postal Service ballot mail controls are all different pieces with all different authorities, all different legal fights, all pointing toward the same objective: election integrity, verification, traceability, accountability. That's the bigger story. So these are not just random election headlines, folks. Not things that are just happening independently of each other. They're pieces of President Trump's overarching election integrity architecture, and the Supreme Court just gave one part of that more room to continue. So I'm going to keep watching the First Circuit appeal. I'm going to watch the direct legal challenges that, may be imposed to the final Postal Service rule, and what happens with the separate injunction that's still preventing implementation, because the next phase is no longer about what Trump might do. It's going to be about what the agencies can actually build in the time that they have left. And that is a much harder fight for them, but also the opposition. Okay, they're going to have to point to the specific provision and the specific authority. Okay, so Trump's attacking this head on, and the Supreme Court, they may not have handed him the final victory, but they removed one of the biggest obstacles that were preventing him and his team from moving the concept into implementation. And that's why this matters. So Trump will keep up the good fight. We'll keep pressing on the periphery. And let's hope these midterms end up going our way. A long road until November, but I think we have the right focus, the right people. We just need the right results. And we have to make sure that everything that we do is above board going forward, because if we give these lower level courts the opportunity to pull strings, that's exactly what they're going to do. because it doesn't matter if President, you've heard the old adage, President Trump could give a cure to cancer and they would still find a problem with it, unfortunately.